Hello and welcome back to Karborundum Quest. So, we have for you first a reminder to always check your staging, especially when you start to use things like gravity turn and mech jib to do automated things. Yeah, so that happened. So, first we actually have for you a little rocket that is taking rocket parts up to the Scrap Heap space station to start orbital assembly of a spaceship I designed. Now, it's a simple enough thing. All you have to do is repeatedly ferry things up. The only thing that gets annoying is having to do the same mission over and over again. This is why I cut so much out, because it does take time and anybody watching this would be bored silly. Most of my videos are around about 6 to 8 hours worth of footage cut down. But as you can see here, I'm just finding out where my stuff is, transferring it across, getting everything sorted up, and then deorbiting the module. And this is just a disposable module. I'm trying to slam it back into the atmosphere fast enough that it burns up in the atmosphere. And as you can see, that didn't work, but it hit the ocean, so that'll do. Now this is another rocket we have doing the exact same thing. I decided to leave the SSTU parts and go back to DSEV, which is the containers on the side of this. The rest of it's made from the B9HX pack. So it's a fairly good way, although it's an expensive way, of launching a chunk of mass into orbit. And there we go. Now we've selected the build, and as you can see there, it still requires more parts than we have on the station, so we're going to have to send up even more. But first things first, to get things sped along, because it's a couple hundred days to get it started, I'm taking up some rocket parts, but I'm also taking up some engineers and some people. So I thought I'd use this SSTO that I've been messing about in Skunkworks. I finally got it balanced, and then I decided to strip out the insides and turn it into a cargo hauler. So we put a few of our engineers on board, we transfer across a little bit more rocket parts, but obviously this thing's very inefficient for carrying them. And then a standard deorbit, and I thought I'd keep this all in because it was quite interesting, or keep most of this in because it was quite interesting. It worked fairly well. Everything is balanced in this, and I've double checked and triple checked this. It is balanced all the way down, but for some reason it still at one point flips backwards. I don't know why, but it's just a case of pumping fuel forward, and here we go, our nice little spiralling descent back to the runway. Obviously, as you can see there, it's still got a lot of fuel left. It's got quite a bit of delta V. Once it's in orbit, it's got 6,000 meters per second of delta V, so it can do everything within the Kerbin main system, the Moon and Minmus. And here we have just one of the many burns to correct the satellites that I launched at the end of the last video. Now in total there was, I think, about 40 burns, and when I was editing this video it took so long just filming even little parts of, just to show you each individual satellite, that I decided to cut the lot out and just leave that one in. So there are varying orbits that all arrive at Juna, and one that goes to Eve that has a whole load of satellites for Eve. Now that we've done that, time for a bit more science. So we're back down at Moho, and we're going to launch our lander again and gather a bit more science. I've done this a couple of times to get some science and send it up to the main science labs back at Kerbin. But I decided just to do it again and film it, just to sort of show the ongoing progression of what we're doing. I just decided, because that was my materials bay, which is part of the SSTU mod, wasn't reset, I'd reset it just for a scientist, and then I make the mistake of crashing while landing and breaking my landing gear. And it's at this point where I go to launch that I realise that I also blew off the bottom engine, so I have to use the emergency engine to get this thing back to orbit. And I'm keeping an eye on my fuel here while trying to burn to orbit, and this is what they call target fixation, because I'm keeping such an eye on what I'm doing that I wasn't watching the height. And those Kerbals will be missed. But not for long, because we have other things to do. So the scrap heap space station is starting to run out of supplies. There's a lot up there, but it's now got a lot of people on board, so I decided to send a few more engineers up and load it with supplies. As you can see there on the right hand side, that's all the supply containers just toggled there, so it's easy to transfer once it docks. Just pulling the solar panels out of the way, and then finding the supply container and transferring everything in. Now there's various supply containers dotted around this station, so I was just trying to fill everything up and then transferred across a couple of engineers and deorbit again. Nice and simple. Now, I have always said that I am not brilliantly good at doing this, and here's a perfect example. After the last crash, I ran out of fuel about 3 kilometers from the runway. So, just gliding it to splashdown. And there you go, any landing that you can walk away from is a good one. So that's the first good one. And now that they have mourned the loss, our little Kerbals around about around about Moho have decided to come back to Kerbin. So that was just them leaving orbit and heading back for home. And there we go. So now we're just deorbiting our supply ship, now that the supplies that were on it have been used up as well. It still requires more to build the ship that I'm building at the scrap heap, but this again showing that I am very bad at landing. I managed to get it fairly smooth, but I overshoot by quite a bit. I'm just not very good at landing. Standard explosions, I don't know what went. Parachutes out, and it actually stopped it. And it stopped it really close to the water. I have no idea how I managed that. But here we go, after a lot of refueling, we finally have the Infinity fully built at the scrap heap. And this time it's actually built inside the assembly dock, because the assembly dock's so large that I don't have to mess about with trying to assemble them outside of it. We're just going through setting up all the fuel that it needs for the moment. It's not fully fueled by any means, but just giving it enough so that it can run its reactor for a little while, and so that it can maneuver out of the dock. We don't want it there because during time warp it will possibly clip into the dock and explode. So just getting clear of the main station, and then we just adjust its orbit, just using the RCS, not the main engines yet. It doesn't have any fusion pellets on it, so it can't start up the main engines. It's only got liquid hydrogen at this point, and not much of it. So the RCS runs on liquid hydrogen and a good chunk of electricity. So that's why we're using that, just to do a bit of a change in orbit and pull it away from the station and get it lower, so it takes less delta V to get it fueled up. So there we go. Now just sending some crew over to it. Now that it's out of the way, and launching a supply ship for it. Now this is one of the oddest supply ships I've ever made, because it was launched almost entirely out of the atmosphere on rockets, on solid propellant rockets. And this is why you can see me tipping back into the atmosphere to try and adjust my orbit so it doesn't throw me too high. This ship doesn't have much delta V on it. Although it does have a lot of, you can see the cylinders there that are liquid hydrogen. It has a lot of that, but the main engine doesn't run on liquid hydrogen. It runs on standard liquid fuel and oxidizer. So once we get there, we refuel it, and it turns out we've got a lot of liquid hydrogen left over, We also gave it some nuclear material to keep the reactor going. So we head, because with the excess fuel, we head this over to the scrap heap and start storing fuel and everything else that we can in the scrap heap. And then our standard deorbit. And by now you should know that the standard deorbit means something goes hysterically wrong that I've not planned for. And in this case, it's the fact that those cryogenic tanks from Nearty's mod cannot handle re-entry heat. So they explode and send parts of the ship flying everywhere. Luckily we only have Jeb on board, and he is skilled at landing. However, this is not an easy thing to land, and he dies. But as everybody knows, Jeb is a vampire and he will rise again. So here's the Infinity, just starting, getting everything set up. All the recyclers on, it's got a few crew now. They came over from the refuel ship. And we just head out to Minimus, because the reason it's named the Infinity is that this should, it's one of my designs, it should be able to go to any place within the Kerbal star system. It has a lot of delta V for the liquid hydrogen. The main thing that it needs is the fusion pellets. I realised after this that I've actually miscalculated and it doesn't have as much as it should, but it can land on moons and refuel. It was designed with this in mind. It can't land on an atmospheric body, and it cannot land on, I've forgotten the name of it, I think it's Tylo, the big planet in the Julian system that has the same gravity as Kerbin, but it can land on smaller moons. And it does have enough life support to keep going. So here is our aforementioned probe, and this is us getting into Juno orbit, and you can see what went wrong there. I have run out of fuel, and I'm still on an escape trajectory. So coming up with a quick idea, I decide to jettison my actual mod early, my lovely little pod for going to the ground. This is a little science pod made out of the K&K base systems. And then using throttle controlled avionics to balance the engines, I managed to get this to a slingshot around the moon of Juno. I've forgotten the name of it now. So that it brings me into an elliptical orbit, which will give me a little advantage when coming back down to Juno, because I don't have the delta V to get directly there, I don't think, and land as well, because this needs the thrusters to land. So I thought I'd keep this all in just to show how it was rescued. There we go, a couple of burns, and as you can see I'm getting warnings from different things on the alarm clock. But we managed to get close enough to Juno to bring it into a circularized orbit. So now that we've gotten down and circularized, I decide to jump across to the other thing that was giving me the warning. Took me a minute longer to jump than I thought. But there we go, jumped across. And this is yet another thing. This is a problem with sending so many things to Juno at the one point. This started to cause me a lot of problems. And I haven't designed these nearly well enough. I didn't test anything with the exception of making sure that it could land. And in some cases I didn't test that either. I really should have. So this is just bringing some of the ships back into orbit, and here I made a fatal mistake and I undocked this, deciding to leave the main thruster pack at a high altitude just so I could use it as a relay. And the problem is that I've run out of delta V, so this little base section is actually just in orbit. There's nothing I can do with it, it's out of fuel. so I have to go and rescue that later possibly. But here's a little supply cache that has been launched specifically for the guys that are on Juna at the moment that don't have any supplies and can't really do anything at the moment aside from create more life support, which they do have the ability to do. So this is just some equipment and some rocket parts so that they could do other things. And it's also, this also has a small rover attached to the bottom of it. So here we go, just bringing it down. I'm leaving the heat shields on for the moment because they provide a bit of drag. They actually weren't needed at all when it comes to the thermal. Just because it never went fast enough to get flames. There we go. Not a brilliant landing, but a landing, and the rover's intact, so that'll do. So now that that's all done, we take a little jump to our lovely little ship that I created out by Dres. And as you can see, for this one, what I've done is the actual lander section is just the entire command module. There is a secondary command module, an inline unit on this ship. And the docking adapter is just at the bottom of the cargo bay for the Mark III parts. So there we go, a bit of a view of it. And then just picking a bit of a landing zone. And then getting us down. And because I am a perfectionist, but I am not good at perfection, I decide to try and move the landing area, and it all goes horribly wrong. At least everybody's alive this time, but I'm in quite an odd position to try and take off again. So while we're here, we do some of our science. And then there is a small issue where I land the main ship so that I can recover these people, because I can't get this up right, and I also noticed that I don't have enough delta V to get it into orbit anyway. So I land the ship, and then I decide to fly this over. And because this is my landing episode, it all went wrong again. So I decide to jump out one of my Kerbals just in time. And here we go. At least he's survived, and we've got the engineer, which is what we need. And then that happened. There was a fatal failure in the engine, which has propelled our ship into the sky. We try and track it down, and we die in the landing. So now I have a small crew that is on Dres that has enough life support for over 10 years, and has power thanks to a nuclear reactor for a few years. But unfortunately, they have no engines, so they can't get to orbit. So back to Juna, and our little scavenging rover, which didn't manage to find any rare metals to build things, which is a problem. We bring it back, park it up, break a solar panel because it's all about breaking things this time, and then we just bring back our little Kerbal. And then back to our lovely little science base. Now I'm having a bit of problems. This isn't brilliantly balanced, but the entire idea was to land it on throttle controlled avionics, just because I couldn't get it balanced as the fuel depleted. So this is my answer to it. And it's how a normal ship would run. In real life, they would balance the thrust to make it hover. But it's exactly how your little drones run these days. So there we go, just trying to fine tune and get close but not too close. I want it to be close to the other base but outside of loading range, roughly. And there we go, the rogue shoots out, main shoots out. Trying to keep it orientated. The gear out. And then a little tiny bust with the thruster. And an actually correct landing with no breakages. So this little mission has been rescued. Now this has enough life support to last for a while, and that's a little science lab on top of it. And they're just a high antenna. And that was a good place to leave it. But because I said I'd keep in all the mistakes, I'll show you this other resupply. Now this just has rocket parts and equipment on it and nothing else. A bit of fuel. But there we go, we get a small problem ejecting our heat shield, which blows off one of the equipment containers. And because we lost parachutes, the parachutes cannot land us. But at least we managed to land most of it. So that one was sort of rescued. So thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you next time.